Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to meeting 27 of the Community Development and Recreation Committee, and welcome to members of the committee, members of the public, and any visiting councilors that may join us along the way. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are on the agenda and what's coming up next. Of course, as always, you can always follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at toronto.ca/council. I'd like to begin today's meeting with a presentation, a really transformative award for Toronto Paramedic Services. I'd like to recognize remarkable achievement by the hardworking staff at Toronto Paramedic. On January the 18th, the International Academies of Emergency Dispatch, IAED for short, reaccredited Toronto Paramedic Services Central Ambulance Communication Centre as a Centre of Excellence. This designation signifies that our emergency medical dispatchers provide care that meets an internationally benchmarked standard of quality and where all calls for medical emergencies are handled consistently. The IAED is a professional organization whose mandate it is to promote excellence in emergency dispatch and accredits communication centers around the world that achieve its established standards. Toronto Paramedic Services Communication Centers received its original accreditation in 2008 and has been awarded consecutive successful reaccreditations every 3 years since then. In fact, it is one of only 122 medical communication centers around the world that is accredited by IAED. Toronto Paramedic Services Communication Center is the largest ambulance communication center in Canada, and it processes over 400,000 calls, 911 calls, requests for paramedic service each year using medically approved industry standards. And this recognition as the Center of Excellence signifies that every day our city's residents and visitors enjoy world-class medical care, not only from our paramedics, but from those who take the emergency calls for medical help, something that we can truly be fortunate to have. So please join me once again in congratulating the staff of Toronto Paramedic Services on this outstanding achievement. Their dedication to excellent services assures Torontonians that they are receiving the best possible emergency care every day, and they are saving hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives every year. If you'd like to come forward with the plaque, the committee would like to recognize you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to introduce a few of the folks that are here today. With us are some of our leadership team from the Communication Center. We have Deputy Chief Tarma Yukivi. We have Commander Joe Moyer. And we have our EMD, our Emergency Medical Dispatcher of the Year, which is a peer-nominated process, and that's 13-year member David Laskowski. We also have a special guest from the Academy. So the International Academy of Emergency Dispatches, which is based in Salt Lake City. Kim Rigdon is here with us today, and she's the Global Director of Accreditation. So she was here this week to present with us their certificate. We're very proud to have her here.
Great, welcome. Well, come on up, guys. Committee members. Oh, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. On a more somber note, Mayor John Tory has officially proclaimed today Jersey Day, and that is why some of us are wearing hockey jersey. And this is done in the City of Toronto to honor the players and families affected by last week's tragic crash involving the Humboldt Broncos of the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League. Thank you, committee members that have done so. Obviously, we are heartbroken when we see the news reports and families. Certainly, as someone who has a son around that same age, I can't imagine what the families are going through. For those who don't know, the Humboldt Broncos bus crash occurred on October the 6th. The coach bus collided with a semi-trailer near Armley, Saskatchewan, killing 16 people and injuring 13. The bus was carrying members of the Humboldt Broncos, an ice hockey team that plays in the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League, as well as coaches and others associated with the team. In their memory, I'd like to request a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? There are none. Motion to confirm the minutes of February 28th, 2018. Councillor Cressy? Councillor Mihevc, all those in favor? Carried. So we can go through the agenda. We have a couple of speakers on item 27.4. We have had a request to go into private on item 27.2. Is that correct, Councillor Mihevc? It is correct. Okay. So let's go through the agenda. 27.1, authorized recreational and skill building programs in Toronto. Let's hold it down, okay? I think staff's comments were pretty blunt, but let's hold it down. 27.2, Toronto Fire Services Diversity and Recruitment Update, Operations Firefighter Recruit Class 2017 to 2022, I guess. You're going to hold that? You're going to go on camera for that one. Okay. 27.3, proposed Canada, Ontario, Toronto Memorandum of Understanding on Immigration Settlement. I'm going to hold that. I have a motion for that one that I'd like to move. 27.4, suitability of identified property as a proposed shelter. That's 27.4, and there is a confidential attachment. Councillor Cressy, you mentioned you'd like to do something with that one? 27.4, suitability of identified property.
Councillor Fletcher has a request to defer it, but I understand there are some speakers. So I would suggest that we hear from people who have came here to depute, because they've came all the way down. And I know that Councillor Fletcher, as it's in her ward, has requested a deferral, but I think we should hear from the speakers.
So with the wish of committee, we can hear from the speakers, but then an advisor to the speakers, we will be moving deferral as a courtesy to Councillor Fletcher. Oh, we have a new business. Councillor Layton. Motion to introduce. All those in favor? That is carried. You want to move? You want to approve it? Has everyone had a chance to look at it? Okay. Move to approve. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried.
Mr. Chair, can I just advise, I just want to advise committee members, because we're starting at 2:30, I believe my offers in advance when the time has changed, let people know that I have to leave at 4:15 for a longstanding private appointment that I can't miss. So my apologies if we have not completed by then.
Okay. Everyone should keep that in mind as we go forward. Councillor Wong Tam, I believe you held 27-1. You had questions for staff?
That's right. I just have a quick question. I wanted to find out, through you, Mr. Chair, whether or not the new legislation has resulted in any loss of morning programs, such as the Boys and Girls Club, which I understand has lost 3 hours of morning programming. Do you know if that's true?
The legislation does only permit for such programs to operate once a day. So generally, they would choose to operate after school, but we've had no issues raised with respect to a loss of service.
And so, if you can clarify that no issues have been raised, have you gone out proactively to ask if there are parents who have concerns, or is it a passive approach that no one's filed any concerns or complaints, therefore there's an assumption that there is none?
With TDSB as a good example, they currently have 500 programs offering that type of program. They asked all 500 to comply, and there was no issue with the exception of 10%. So there were 5 that were not deemed exempt. So or 1%, sorry. So all of those programs continued. We also did a scan with the provincial government. They also only had 10 programs that were not in compliance, but then eventually did did fall under compliance. The Middle Childhood Coalition, that also has some parents, really speak to that age group of 6 to 12. They also did not raise any issues around disruption of service. So that would be the extent of the consultation.
And was the Boys and Girl Clubs, were they involved with those discussions?
Boys and Girls Clubs, they are exempt. They're already deemed authorized. Their closure of the morning program, I can't speak to that, but they are exempt already. And so that probably would have been a business decision for them. They don't require a license. They're identified under the legislation as being exempt.
So therefore, what you're saying to me, and I just want to clarify, is that that the changes in the regulations or the legislation is not going to have any impact to what we've heard on the ground with respect to the Boys and Girls Club. So if there is any loss of community programming services for children, it would have been their own decision outside of any legislation changes, correct?
I believe so. The one thing that the Boys and Girls Club can do under the legislation is they can provide a morning program under breakfast program. So there are options available to them. I just don't know why they chose to close those.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Wong Tam. Any other questions for staff? I just have one. I'm always curious when it comes to provincial statute on what other municipalities are doing. Did we reach out to other municipalities and see how they were responding on this issue?
Through the chair, yes, we did. We did a communication to all 47 that have this ability under the Act. 10 responded, and 10 said that they were not pursuing it. In just conversation with some of our municipal colleagues, it looks like the mass majority of them are not taking this up as an option.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Someone want to move the recommendations?
Actually,
Or is there?
I'm just going to move a
Oh,
quick
there's.
motion.
We can go to speakers if you want. If you'd like to
Yes,
speak to it.
if I can, and I think it's rather quick, largely because what has been heard in the community and on the ground is slightly different than what staff are reporting. And just to clarify, to make sure that we're all on the same page, and truly there is no loss of services, if we can just have the GM of Children's Services work with Middle Childhood Matters Coalition and the Ministry of Children and Youth to identify any reductions in services and to report back in the next meeting of CDR in June, if that is absolutely true. And if it is, like, it's just simply what we're asking for is a one-page report saying you've spoken to everybody formally and the results are there is no reduction of services, then we'll move forward from there. Just to reconcile the difference of what we're hearing from staff and what we've heard from the community.
We're going to make a minor amendment to your motion. Instead of Ministry of Children and Youth Services, it's Ministry of Education.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. That's helpful.
Any other speakers? Well, we have the one motion in front of us. Everyone take a look. It's on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Mahavoc, you held item 2 down, and you also have...
We can wait for the end.
Into private at the end? Okay, so we'll continue to hold item number 2 down. We'll go to item 3.
Sorry.
Proposed Canada, Ontario, Toronto Memorandum of Understanding on Immigration and Settlement. A most timely piece in front of us. Questions for staff? Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, and through you, Mr. Chair, to the appropriate staff. So in here, we're establishing the local immigration partnerships in Ontario. Just out of curiosity, how many are being established here in the City of Toronto?
Through the chair, the local immigration partnerships were established under the previous COIA agreement. And in the City of Toronto, there are 5. There are 4 local quadrant local immigration partnerships, and then the citywide local immigration partnership under the newcomer office.
And are these established on the ground offices?
They are established through existing settlement agencies. So for the citywide local immigration partnership, it's the City of Toronto that houses that partnership. At the quadrant level, it's existing settlement agencies who are funded to coordinate the local quadrant LIPs.
Right. So, what supports do these, I guess, LIPs offer to newcomers?
They're intended as service coordination, system coordination supports. They're not actually funded to provide any direct services. That's done through settlement agencies. I think a good illustration of the value for money of local immigration partnerships was how well the city managed the Syrian refugee influx. The kind of interagency relationships that had been built up really facilitated providing settlement services in that extreme situation.
Right. And just another point. So in page 3 of the report at the bottom, the MOU highlighted 4 areas of mutual interest. We have employment, education and training services, and citizenship and engagement. But it does not mention housing, which is a significant issue. So how is that being addressed?
I absolutely agree with you that it would be beneficial to see housing there. And we are in discussions with federal and provincial colleagues, and we'll work to see if there's a way we can get that reference put into the new MOU.
Okay, I may draft a motion to that effect. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ford, for those questions and for asking what I was going to ask. And I do have a motion ready if you'd like to confer over it. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much. I just have, I think it's one question, it may stretch into two. The differences between the MOU prior to the MOU current, the draft, what is the major significant change? Because it sounds like there isn't a lot that's changed, but the one big piece that has changed.
There are not a lot of significant changes. Neither involve funding. Both are intended to facilitate at the staff level policy and program conversations between all three orders of government.
And so there's one sentence in this report at the very end that talks about it's confirming what you just said. It doesn't address any funding issues or issues associated with pre-claim refugees. Can you explain to us who is responsible for those that funding as well as the issues coordinate pre-claim? Who generally takes care of that work now?
So Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada does not have a mandate to support pre-claim refugees. From an IRCC perspective, their mandate only extends to permanent residents, claimants who have entered the process and proceeded through the process. Someone who is a pre-claim refugee is not entitled to federal support. They may be entitled to some provincial support, but again, until they've actually begun the claim process, they're not eligible for income assistance. The availability of health supports has broadened a bit. So there are some provincial health supports for pre-claim individuals, but there's very little provincial or federal service they have access to.
So just to summarize, that particular a subpopulation there, the pre-claim refugee population, largely sits in limbo without a lot of supports, not provincially, not federally, and certainly not at the city level, correct?
That's correct, and the city experiences the first most immediate pressure through the shelter system. Which is why we're working with our community partners to figure out how to better serve that population and make sure that they get into the refugee claim process as quickly as possible, because once they're in that process, they are eligible for some federal health support and for Ontario Works. So we're trying to knit that together, but pre-claim individuals are very vulnerable.
And so then my final question, because you've just jogged it, is there not a benefit at this particular point in time while the MOU is open for redrafting, revisions, and a new set of signatures? Is this not the time to try to ensure that the federal and provincial government can give us some assistance on the pre-claim refugees, considering what we're experiencing in the shelters?
It's a non-negotiable from a federal perspective. We won't have an MOU that contains that. That's not up for negotiation from a federal perspective. It's a non-starter in the context of this MOU.
Okay. Hopefully the councillor's motion will make it a starter issue. Thank you.
The legislation doesn't allow for monies going to individual claimants, but there's nothing in the legislation that prevents transfers to municipalities. Is that correct?
Just to be clear, the MOU, the report before you, it has no funding implications. There's no discussions between Canada, Ontario, and Toronto. In fact, the COIA agreement writ large, the agreement between Canada and Ontario, is not a funding agreement. There is no money involved in this agreement. That's not within the realm of the negotiations.
Wouldn't the onus be on them to reject any overtures that we make regarding shelter and housing? We can come to the table with anything we want.
So just to be clear, COIA is a signed agreement between Canada and Ontario. There is a Canada-Ontario immigration agreement that was signed last fall. That's not up for negotiation. It sets the frame for a potential memorandum of understanding between Canada, Ontario, and Toronto. Council can choose to engage in that, but it cannot suggest that Canada, Ontario open up an agreement they signed in the fall. There were no funding components to the Canada-Ontario immigration agreement, so there's no frame within which to have that conversation under this MOU.
The only thing before us right now is authorizing the Deputy City Manager, Cluster A, to enter into a memorandum of understanding for a framework to negotiate. We're not even at the negotiations.
No, we very much are at the negotiations. The timing on this is that for a Canada, Ontario, Toronto memorandum of understanding to occur, it needs to be signed off before the June election. So the clock is very much ticking, and staff from all three levels have been working through what the revised MOU would look like. That's why we're bringing it forward now, because the timing is extremely tight. The MOU, as it was the first time around, provides a structure for policy and program discussions between the three orders of government. It is not a funding agreement, and nor is it designed to address funding issues. That's not.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, what I read here is we're not improving an agreement nor setting the terms or conditions. We're providing direction on a framework for the three levels of government to discuss. I mean, that's how I read this. But.
The MOU is a framework through which the three orders of government, the IRCC, Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, and city staff deal with settlement issues and work to align program interventions and activity in this area.
All right. We could go back and forth all afternoon. So why don't we leave it at that? Committee will have a chance on whether they want to put housing and shelter on the agenda. I think it's a crucial issue. Any other questions for staff? Any speakers? I just have the one motion, and we are quite clearly asking staff to add shelter and temporary housing as a shared funding provision. And clearly we can do more homework on it. I understand that individual claimants cannot get a housing allowance, but there's nothing stopping municipalities from receiving federal and provincial transfers to assist. Well, why don't we put it to a vote? I see staff are very excited about it.
Their fear is they won't get an agreement if it mentions shared funding.
I should remind staff, this is the #1 issue within our shelter debate, how to handle newcomers. And unless we bring it up, we're going to be sending a message that it's not important. Okay, we're going to make it a minor amendment. We're taking out the word negotiate and request. How's that sound? Everyone's happy? Great. All those in favor of the amended motion? Opposed? That is carried. And the item is amended. All those in favor? That is carried. We have deputants on item number 4. Suitability of identified property as a proposed shelter. Greg Cook. Thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Greg Cook, and I think it'd be great if the city would buy as much land as possible that would increase shelter space. I work at Sanctuary, and I've been an outreach worker and drop-in worker in Toronto for over 10 years. I also participate in organizing the Toronto Homeless Memorial. Just a few hours ago, a report was released by the city identifying that 100 people died in 2017 without housing. I'm reminded of Pierre Gregoire, who died February 15 of 2017 on a night that was very cold, and the respite centers were full. I'm reminded of Navneet Sandhi, who was in Parkdale, who died shortly after being evicted. I'm reminded of Alora Wells, who died at 27 by her encampment in the Rosedale Ravine. I'm reminded of Jess, who passed away of a drug overdose while couch surfing at a friend's without housing. I'm reminded of a young Indigenous man who was 28, who died at the end of November before the armories were open, when the respite centers were cold and when the respite centers were full and it was very cold out. So I think this is a very important item. And I just going to pause for 20 seconds to honor the lives of the 100 people that died and to grieve their deaths. I am confident that there would have been even more deaths had we not won the fight to open the armories and 700 plus respite spaces. No one should be without a home, definitely without a choice of a shelter bed. Yet this city continues to fail its residents in this regard. This news release that was a couple days ago by SHS articulates that the city is reducing the number of respite spaces in May by 248. I question, why have they chosen the 2 replacement respite centers to be an hour-plus journey from the downtown core? Has anyone here tried to afford transit while on OW or with precarious work? It's not possible. I encourage you to try commuting to work on $20 a month. Putting respite centers at 4100 Dundas West and 1030 Don Mills means it will take people 2.5 hours to walk to get to a cot and indoors. I do think it is really good news that the Davenport Respite is being converted into a women's shelter. However, I am very concerned that this report states a separate initiative is underway and on track to create 1,000 new shelter beds by 2020. We need 1,500 today. We need the city to build 10,000 units of affordable housing each year, and not just the 300 that were built in 2017. I encourage, as part of this kind of effort to build new shelter beds, I encourage the city to start a public relations campaign demanding that the provincial and federal government start building affordable housing now and help out with the shelter crisis. I suggest that we broaden the criteria for shelter facilities. Small is beautiful. It is also more humane. We need 1,000 new beds this year. And I'd also ask that we think about increasing rent subsidies, especially for families. Steve Meager writes, since January 1st, Toronto has seen a nightly increase of 835 shelter users, according to numbers. 584 of these individuals are in the family shelter sector. Homeless children and parents now represent a staggering 70% of the total increase in homelessness in our city in 2018. Your choices are literally ripping families apart. Kids into CS, parents bereaved.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much. Yogi Ahara.
Just for the record, Councillor Pasternak, it's Acharya.
I do apologize.
So I'm a member of the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. I was hoping to find out more about the shelter site in question, but given its deferral, I'll focus my comments like Greg did on the loss of Respite Sites amid an ongoing shelter crisis. Many of you I see are wearing jerseys today to show your empathy and support for the grieving families of the 16 victims of the families lost in the bus, the people lost in the bus crash in Saskatchewan. It's an important gesture because it highlights our shared humanity. But please remember that the 100 people who died on the streets of Toronto homeless have families too. They have friends, and their friends and families grieve their loss. And you can do things now to prevent it in this coming year. Speaking of which, I want to address the respite sites. Up until yesterday, we had no clue as to what exactly was going to happen following April 15th, the date the respite sites were originally scheduled to close. I'm glad staff came out and announced the plan. I'm disappointed that it took the announcement of a public action for that to happen. Regardless, the plan calls for the maintenance of 6 of the 8 respite sites and the replacement of 2, the Better Living Center and the 348 Davenport Road site. Spaces that were lost as a result of the closure of the Out of the Cold program are not being replaced. There are 2 key problems with this plan. First, respite service is being cut by almost 250 spaces. The graph there, the Excel spreadsheet there demonstrates that. I'll go through that momentarily. This cut includes 60 spaces that were lost, that are being lost at Margaret's this Sunday, located at Dundas and Sherbourne, where the need for homeless shelters is dire. Secondly, the city is forcing a dreadful choice on homeless people. They must either travel far out of the downtown core, leaving behind the support networks, services, and related infrastructure, or stay put and revert to surviving on the streets, under bridges, in ravines, and on the streets. Many will be forced to choose the latter. In fact, we're already hearing from a lot of people who will not and cannot go all the way out to almost Runnymede and Dundas and Don Mills and Lawrence in order to seek the bare bones shelter from the elements that the respite sites provides. So if you look at the, if you look at the spreadsheet in front of you, the column on the left indicates the current capacities of the 8 respite sites. The columns on the right indicate its replacement. The Better Living Center is losing a capacity of about 100. The Margaret's is losing capacity of about 60. In total, with the respite sites alone, you have a loss of 155 spaces. Out of the Coles, which offered 93 spaces on an average nightly through the course of the winter, are being cut. There's no replacement. They're closing, I mean, and there's no replacements for that. So you lose 93 spaces as a result of that. You know, over the course of winter, you had over 700 people staying on most nights in the city's respite system, which consisted of both the 8 respite sites and the various out of the Coles. Where are those people going to go? The plan calls for the creation of about 505 spaces. Where are the other people going to go? That's a question I believe you must answer, and answer in time for April 15th. You've had the time to prepare for this date. It was coming. We all knew it. I know the item's not on the agenda, but you have the responsibility to add it today and discuss it and ask staff to replace those spaces in the downtown east where the need is dire and where people are located. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Okay, thank you. Maurice?
Thank you.
Adongo.
Yes, thank you. Okay, my name is Maurice Adongo. I work as a community health worker at Street Health, which is at Dundas and Sherborne. So the reason I'm here today is to deal with the whole situation of the closing. One of the places closing is right next to us. That's All Saints. And we are very familiar with the people there. We offer different services there. We do ID there, ID replacements, health card, whatever. We have, they just come over to see nurses at Street Health if they want. The other one is Better Living Center. I've been there a couple times. We have 2 nurses from Street Health, a nurse practitioner and a registered nurse, who go there once a week for about 3-4 hours. That has been very helpful to people there because they actually get to see a health worker on site. And one of the things that I know our ED is trying to sort out is if that moves to Lambton Arena, which is a whole different situation, she has to figure out how to get those nurses to still go there. So basically, people who are in the shelters, they still have all the other aspects of their lives. They need access to medical services. They need access to basic needs stuff. So the first problem we have with the movement, it's all right to open those places, but we cannot do without something in the downtown area because the result is very simple, as we said. People simply will go into the alleyways, they will go into the parks, they will find anywhere else to stay. Because to go to Lambton, I'm going to have to take this, if I can afford it, take the subway to Jane, take Jane bus to Dundas, take another bus across the street. That's 3, whatever. And in the morning, probably you're coming back downtown where you have your social networks, you have the friends that you know, you have people that you can interact with. Probably your pharmacy is somewhere down here. Your doctor is somewhere down here. Now, these people can barely afford 1 ticket. At Street Health, we get a couple tokens to give people. And one of the biggest problems we have every single day is what do you do? You can't give everybody, the thing. So we have that big problem. So the thing that we need is this committee and the city has to figure out how to get beds available for people in the downtown area, particularly in the East End. And the option of these other things look good on paper, and we can sit here and say, come on, guys, you got a place. And they'll just say, you're joking. How am I going to get there? How am I going to come back? So that's problem number 1. The problem, the other problem we have with particularly the area where we are now is we had the people at All Saints. Then there's the Margaret. Margaret can take 50. All Saints can take double that amount. Now, you're going to tell these guys on Sunday night, okay, Sunday morning, they tell, we are not open tonight. So you have a couple hours to figure out where to go. And basically, you're just telling them, you know what, go to the streets. So it'd be better, straighter for them to just tell them, this is it, the services are done. And like Yogi was saying, the impact of closing of the Out of the Cold, we're going to feel it because it's there, they are convenient, people go there, it's a friendly place. And even some people who rarely go to some of these other places will go to the Out of the Cold. they're out. So those 93 is not replaceable. So effectively, what we are doing and what we are asking the city to consider is, okay, you are opening up some places, but let's take in consideration the possibility that people will get there. The other thing, just before I end up, is that it took us a bit of a hassle to get things going this year, but when we actually got it going, it worked well for everybody. It worked well for the city, it worked well for the folks there, but it took forever to just fight over it. And then we got it right. So let's get this right from the beginning so that we don't have to come here again next week after you shut down the other ones and say, you know what, we got problems. So let's try to be proactive. It helps. Otherwise, we'll be friends for a long time if we do that. Okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Okay, thank you very much. AJ Withers? Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Social Work at York University, a member of the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, and thank you for hearing me today. It's my understanding that any one of you, having spoken with the counselor outside, could introduce another item during this meeting, if you do so on letterhead, to address the respite issue. I could be wrong, but we're trying to speak to the clerk's office. Anyways, if there is an immediate crisis around the loss of the respite beds, and I hope that the committee here today could, because this item is being deferred, could hear motions on the respite crisis. Speaking to the shelter item before you that is in camera, or the report is in camera, I have to say that I don't agree with Greg Cook, who said that we should buy as much land as possible, and I think that the examples that have been given about how the 2 new respite centers that are so far away are really good examples of what shouldn't be done in terms of opening new spaces. We shouldn't be buying as much land as possible. We should be buying a lot of land. We should be opening a lot of shelters. We should be opening more respite centers, but we should be doing so in thoughtful ways that are in places that make sense. The 2 new respite sites that are being opened in really unsustainable spaces that we're hearing from a number of people that they aren't going to be accessing them. If I were a member of an organization called the Toronto Association for the Elimination of Homeless People, I would favor that, because statistically, what the plan is before you would make it look like there are far fewer homeless people in the city, because those folks are going to be lost in the statistical numbers. And then we'll go back to what we had before of justifying closing down places. Before we didn't have enough space. We were told there was enough space. We fought for space to be opened, and as those spaces were opened, more and more people used those spaces. Now we're putting spaces far, far away, closing those spaces. Already spaces with inadequate conditions are going to get worse, and then people aren't going to use those spaces, and then they can be justified to be closed. And that's just the absolute wrong way to go. This winter, no one froze to death on the streets of the city. That isn't nothing. Like, that's a really big deal. And that's because of the respite sites. And moving sites into really irrational locations isn't a good solution. And so building shelters in places that make sense is what we need to be doing. Putting respite sites in places that make sense is what we need to be doing, and we certainly can't lose 250 sites, or 250 spaces. And I'm also really concerned about Margaret's. I don't think it can actually hold 50 people. If you've been in there, it's really full when there's 30 people. And taking out the tables and the places for people to eat is going to lead to fights. And things are going to get worse. Bed bugs are going to get worse. Diseases are going to get worse. Everything's going to keep getting worse. I understand that land is really difficult in the downtown. I understand that properties are really difficult. From my perspective, it's hard to step out of the anger that I feel at shelter support and housing, and to some extent at this committee, because we have been coming here for years and saying this is going to happen, and we're here, and had different decisions been made years ago, we would be in a far better position. Nevertheless, right now, we need these, we're in the position that we're in, and we need these spaces, and whatever the community can do to help get better spaces, we'll do. But certainly opening respite sites that no one can use is not an adequate solution. We're in a crisis, and I think that this committee really needs to take action today to stop those 250 spaces from being lost. Over the winter, the media picked up the line from Gaetan Haru that homelessness doesn't end April 15th. And somehow that was news. Media all over the place was picking up that line.
You're a little over 5 minutes, if you could wrap up.
Yeah, so media was picking up that line all over the place. That's not news, but somehow this city forgets that in the spring and in the summer, homelessness stays as bad. And we can't abandon people just because it's getting warmer. We need those sites. Please don't let them be lost starting on Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mahavik.
Quick question. So, and I will ask staff, as I understand it, these two sites are arenas that have been chosen with a lot of flex capacity. So the issue is not so much the spaces, it's getting to the spaces or the lack of a space in the downtown east side. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so I think, like we've said, gyms, arenas, whatever, like arenas probably make a lot of sense. There's changing spaces, there would be washrooms, but like one of them's right by the Science Center. Like that's so far for people. The other one is also, like Marie said, would take forever for people to get to. And the resources and meals are not there for people.
I'm not the local councillor, but are you aware of local sites that staff could look at? Because it's always been one of the things we hear is that, give us a place, buddy.
I suggested one spot off the top of my head on Monday to Mr. Raftis, and they said that they were looking into it. I don't know what has happened there. And I know people have been thinking about it. We've talked to Councillor Wong Tam's office about land purchase, but that's obviously takes a lot longer. And we'll certainly think about it or keep our eyes open for things. And I don't know what this site is or where it is or why they don't want to purchase it.
It's a totally unrelated topic that you're hooking yourself onto, but don't worry about that.
But I think also, like, I don't know what the status of arenas in the downtown east are, or what their programming is.
I'll ask staff at the right time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahavik. Any other questions for the deputant? Just very briefly, when you're referring to closures, are you also referring to out of the cold?
Yes.
So it's my understanding that many of these faith-based organizations can't manage the program during the spring and summer, and we have no authority to impose it on them. They can handle it during the winter because the pressure on their resources, their chapels, their sanctuaries and so forth, their facilities are less, but they need that space back during spring and summer. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. But the reality is that the city has relied on the out of the colds for 30 years as a part of the shelter system, and informally or formally, and now those beds are lost. And regardless of who's managing those beds, there's a loss of those beds, and the city needs to pick up the slack. we don't have those beds now. We need something, we need a place for people to go.
Okay, fair enough. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. So there is a motion to defer this item. We can do that right now.
On behalf of the local councillor for CDs 27.4, I am happy to take care of her deferral motion for one cycle to next meeting when she'll be back.
All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now we go back to the fire services item, Councillor Mihevik. Just before we do, I'd just like to congratulate Elaine on her appointment as acting deputy city manager. It is great to have you at the desk here, so congratulations, and we all look forward to continuing to work with you.
That happened so fast. That happened so fast, I kind of lost it. Could we just reopen, just to have staff an opportunity to say where things are at, given the number of deputants that are here?
Wishing to reopen, I'm happy to reopen.
Only for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's it. That's all.
All right, a motion to reopen.
Thank you.
All those in favor? It's carried.
So I'm just wondering if you can address what you are doing, and within that, as per my question to one of the deputants, is what is the transportation strategy? If these are the only sites, is there anything in the downtown east side that could be made available that's closer to where people's social networks are and support networks are? If they are not, what are the two sites? I know the two sites, but what is a transportation strategy so that people can go there and come back and access their support networks more wholesomely?
Through the chair. So, very challenging issue. There are no other sites other than Davenport. That is another option for us. The issue with the Davenport site is we're trying to turn that into a permanent women's shelter this year as part of the 1,000 beds. So the longer we keep it open, the longer it will take to do that and push it into next year. I did follow up on AJ's question about St. Luke's. We did talk to the administrator. The administrator is going back to the board, and we're going to hear back on Monday. It doesn't sound like most of the follow-ups that we've done. It doesn't sound all that promising. But we checked in on absolutely every option that's been placed before us, and I did ask AJ if there were any other ideas, and that's how we arrived there. And we're open to other ideas also. We continue to look into those things. In terms of the transportation strategy, it is the transportation strategy that we have for all the respite sites, including the BLC. So when we've moved, we've used Streets to Homes and other city staff to help individuals move, and we've given them the choice of whatever either shelter beds are available or respite sites are available, and there is a list of those things. We're actively doing that now with Margaret's. We actually believe, city staff did believe that Margaret's site was going to stay open. It turns out that the damage to the roof was such that the board had to close that particular site, and there was nothing that we could do about that piece. We asked to extend beyond the April 15th with that site, but there was no possibility for that to happen. We will continue to have the same services at those other sites, recognizing that they are not in the downtown core, but food and the services that we provide at the other sites, including handing out tokens and things for transportation. We continue to work with David Jollymore and his team, and Mr. Tanner continues to go out to community agencies even past today, notwithstanding the report that we sent out, to look for any available site, any available space. Councillor Wong Tam connected us through the real estate board, and we've been working very closely with them to look at any opportunity, and that includes respite site or sites for the permanent shelters that we have going forward. We're also working with the folks in the city who are responsible for renovation and construction to move any and all things that we can do in terms of contracts to have things move as quickly as possible. We understand that this plan is not perfect. It is imperfect. We care deeply about the issue, and if we could have that number of spaces perfectly located, then we absolutely would. It is exceptionally difficult to get more spaces in particular in the downtown area. We have 2,300 shelter beds in the 3 wards that we would call downtown. Forgive me if that's not perfectly right. But we also have 235 respite spaces in the 3 wards in the downtown area. Would we like to have more? You bet. Is it possible to do more today? It is not possible at this moment, but we continue to do our very best to try and increase those numbers.
I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud. Do we have a van?
Yeah, so as I explained a minute ago, we use our Streets to Homes teams with vehicles to offer transportation to get people.
But we could do some kind of busing service.
But we certainly do not have the resources to do 24/7 busing from respite. That's why we do use the TTC for that, and one of the criteria for the respite sites is to be, in relative terms, close to transit.
Thank you, Councillor Mahavik. Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the answers. I just want to, in the interest of the fact that we won't be meeting necessarily for another month, and that meeting will take place in May, can you give us a sneak preview? Because I know that we were supposed to have a report regarding the real estate search. If you can give us a little bit of a sneak preview, because I know you don't have all the full answers, but how many leads do you have? How many have been rejected? As of yesterday, I sent you a new listing, you know, like, that's moving very quickly, but it was 50,000 square feet. Like, what's in play right now?
So, thank you for your question, Councillor. Let me go through the stats from the time we started the exercise. So we have looked at and assessed a total of now 316 properties, 232 of which are privately owned and 84 of which are city-owned. We have a breakdown of the reasons why they fell off, why they fell off the map. We have about, and this is all in, this is, you know, this is land, this is every option and possibility we have available to us. We still have 50, I'll say, properties that we are still looking at. Switching gears in terms of some of the channels of in-feed of new opportunities. So we continue to get opportunities coming through the TREB e-blast. So as of a few days ago, we had a total of 180, I'll say bites or contacts through the TREB email blast. I reported at council that we had 14. We added another 4, but after assessing those sites for suitability and other criteria, we now are dealing with 3 as options. And I believe I reported that we had hired a broker dedicated specifically to the shelter file, and they've brought us a total of 6. And we're, after kind of removing what didn't meet criteria, there's still 2 in play.
So therefore, right now, if my counting is correct, if I followed you correctly, you've got really 5 that are very much in a short list, and then 50 that still need a further, deeper review. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
We're at 55 potential properties after the ones that have been canceled out. And so just to verify the report that will be coming to give us a full snapshot of what was just summarized, That's coming in May, June?
Believe it's coming back in June, and we'll be reporting as part of the larger report.
And you believe that by the time June rolls around and that report comes out, do you think you'll have some positive responses for us? Like,
Yes.
we couldn't have scoured the entire city, go through 316 plus 232 plus 84, you know, and then come back with zero. Like zero is not an option.
No, we understand that. We are negotiating a couple, and then we have others that we're feeling positive about.
Okay,
So I'm cautiously optimistic.
great. Thank you very much.
I might just add one more piece just for information and context. In terms, the other thing that we've really tried to work hard at is since January, we've opened 807 beds. 648 of those are motel beds. The families, there were some families in respite that we were able to move out into motel beds. Also, we opened 159 emergency shelter beds, and we've been actively trying to move people out of respite into those 159 shelter beds. So we've been not just replacing the respite spaces, we've been adding in shelter beds and motel beds to address the demand that was there. In the last number of weeks, we have had approximately 500 individuals in respite throughout the city, and we're going to continue to try and provide other opportunities for those individuals. And although the two new sites, we set those at 100 just to use sort of a replacement number, both sites actually have the capacity of 120, but we would like to keep it at 100 if possible. So there's sort of multiple things that we're doing here.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Cressy.
So, and thank you for the update. So just, I think, for the purposes of today and all of us, so as of today, as you said, we are in an imperfect situation, but it's fair to say that we're not done yet, that the search for, as David Jollymar articulated and you did, permanent shelter beds as well as respite is not done, and nothing precludes you from doing that work. And so that work is ongoing. And so the plan announced the other day isn't the final plan, it's just the status update.
Through the chair, that is correct, and we're going to continue to look at any and all options to address this issue as we move forward. The entire team's completely committed to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Cressy, would you like to remove your deferral motion?
Yeah, on behalf of local councillor Fletcher, I'm happy to move this deferral.
All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Mihevc, I understand you have a motion to go into private. I don't think your mic's on.
Identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. It won't be longer than 5 minutes. Oh, sorry, I can.
All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. So all members of the public, media, and all staff not directly related to this item are kindly asked to leave the room. And enjoy the rest of the day. Are we back online? Great. Okay, in private, we were discussing CT 27.2. Need a motion to move the recommendations. Councillor Mihevc, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much, councillors, committee members, staff. Once again, Elaine, congratulations on your interim appointment. It's great to have you. Enjoy the rest of the week.